talking about like the George Floyd, the race riots, etc. What was your experience like in Fort Lauderdale? Well, actually, I have no idea where you're from. I was thinking Fort Lauderdale, sorry, but in South Florida.
Yes, absolutely. I'm from Fort Lauderdale too.
Oh, okay, great. I'm from Fort Lauderdale.
Okay, we're neighbors then. We're neighbors. Um, I mean, when it first happened, protests started occurring everywhere in the country, and we were looking around, and it was kind of calm in Fort Lauderdale at first, and then out of nowhere, protests started popping up everywhere throughout Broward. There was a major protest in downtown Fort Lauderdale that made headlines. I was at the protest. I got tear gassed really badly. Had the worst headache of my lifetime that night. Um, I was at that protest. It was actually a really peaceful protest that I think the organizers did a really good job conducting. And of course, the cops at the end kind of escalated tensions at the end of the protest, and I got tear gas. A lot of my friends did, but I saw a lot of first time protesters, like first time people who never, because I'm involved with the Black Lives Matter Alliance here in Broward. So I saw a lot of like first time people who really came out of the woodworks and were active. Um, and it was just thousands of people, and there were every day there were protests in different places in the county. But the one in Fort Lauderdale was a little different. I mean, there was a person there who got shot with like a rubber bullet in her head. So we got to see some really bad things, and we really got to see tensions grow. There was a curfew. Um, they were arresting people. You know, if you were out past the curfew, um, you couldn't protest. I mean, it was really different. And I've been to a lot of protests myself. I mean, I was at the J20 protest in DC that kind of turned into a riot after Trump was elected. Um, and this was different because there's a lot of raw emotion and anger, and it wasn't to some like abstract things such as a Trump election or anything. It was really focused on tangible things like everything from defunding the police to look, this is what they're doing in Broward County to people. These are the people they killed in Broward County. These are the families who no longer have their son and daughters.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that. Do you think that Fort Lauderdale was treated differently than other places in Florida? Because I remember going to like protests, say in like Parkland, and it was very, very different than environment in Fort Lauderdale or like Coral Gables or even like down south, like further down in Miami.
Yeah, it was treated a lot different. I think the cops were more prone to attacking the protesters there because they were mostly people of color. There were a lot of white people there too. It was a really beautiful protest because it was really diverse. There were a lot of people of color there. There were a lot of people from the surrounding neighborhoods who never were mobilized ever to
Hmm.
participate in anything that were there. And I know the cops didn't really like that a lot. And they tried to frame it as they were rioting and because a window got smashed or something, but I just highly doubt that because the protest I was in and I was a marshal for, because I was actually a marshal in that protest, was really peaceful. It was really it gave space for people to really talk about their emotions, to connect with other people, and to really address their trauma. And there's not a lot of spaces for people. So you saw people screaming and yelling, but that wasn't screaming and yelling in a violent way or anything. There was people getting out anger that they really had because someone else had been killed. And this goes on every day, and police don't go to jail for it.
Of course, that sounds it was awful. Honestly, near the end, it was really violent. I remember it being just a lot. But I'm curious because I struggle with this decision myself. What made you decide to go out and protest as opposed to like staying home because COVID is obviously still a risk, especially in Florida?
My campaign office was actually a couple blocks from where the protest was going to happen. So at first I didn't want to go. I'm like, they're gonna tear gas us, and I don't know, and I don't want it to turn into a riot and everything. Even though I've been to like so many other like protests, um, but then I thought to myself, everyone I know is going, is right down the street, and like this is like the most I could be doing right now outside of like running. This is the most I could be doing, like at a protest, marshaling, helping out, and making my voice heard. So I decided to go out, and it turned out to be a really really big protest. Lots of people there. It was tiring. We marched all the way to the police department and back. Um, but I saw I got it's a lot of space. I got to connect with people who just I never knew before, but they were out for the same reasons. they might have got tear gas their first protest,
Mhm.
um, and you get to see the human element of it too. Like people just really like their inner emotions about something really hurtful that happened, and there's no other place you can really do that. Like you can't do that at work, you can't do that at school too much. So people were in a space with other people who felt the same way, and they were able to talk that out and get it out in their own way, without hurting anyone else. And to me that was healthy, regardless of what anyone tries to say or what the president tries to say. It was really healthy.
Yeah, I suppose like some things just matter more than the risk of a disease, which I completely understand. Like I made the same decision at the same time. Do you think that Florida organized or like the last time I've seen South Florida organized so much in like terms of protests and marches was after the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting? Do you think it happened in a similar vein, or was there like different forms of organizing that happened here than before?
I think it was different types of organizing. Like I think after Stoneman Douglas, it was a lot more. I don't. I can't even find the words for it. I mean, it was an important thing, March for Our Lives, and it talked about important things. But this was less political and more like personal. I would say this was, of course, there were political aims we were all aiming for. There were things we of course wanted to talk about, like defunding police, how we're training how police officers are trained, the criminal justice system. But to me, this was a little bit different. This was real. This was really real. Like I'm not saying March for Our Lives was fake or anything. It's just there were elements of it I think were just a lot different from what like I would expect.
Yeah.
Plus, like the media, like how the media kind of handled this was different. Like this was all rioting and looting, whereas with March for Our Lives, it's more of these kids are brave, and they're talking about what happened, and the shootings and the guns and all of this and the violence. But this was violent to the media. Although this was just normal and healthy, in my
Mhm.
opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with the different
And
portrayals
the
being.
organizing was. I mean, I would say the only similar thing was a lot of the organizing was young people. Like a lot of those big marches and rallies, like down here at least, and across the country, I knew a lot of people who were doing it. Were organized by like high school students. Like, like before in our county, there was not many like high school students organizing like protests. We saw a lot of that. We saw like 3 or 4 different ones, like of high school students organizing like BLM marches in Broward County, and that was really good.
Yeah, I remember going to a virtual like information session by Dream Defenders about how to organize. I thought that was really really helpful and definitely I think inspired a lot more people to go out and organize. Um, as like what was your first experience like going to protest and activism? I'm curious.
I was really young uh, when I first went out. I'm trying to remember, was it like 12 or 13 when I first went? Um, and the first time I went, like I guess I was expecting it to be more like violent and like screaming and yelling in the middle of the street, blah blah blah. I was kind of scared to go. But I'm so glad I got to go early on in my life to really experience it, so I can know like this is not violence. This is like democracy. Actually, this is what democracy actually looks like. People speaking up about the things that are really happening.
Hmm.
And I got there. I still remember the day I went to my first like protest. This is a long time. It must have been like right after Occupy, but it was actually right after the Trayvon Martin shooting. Um, and I just remember seeing like there were a bunch of people there. It was smaller than this, of course, and there were a lot of police. Like it was a lot of people there, but not like what I saw in Fort Lauderdale this year. But there were a lot more police in the way they were like treating people. I'm like, at a young age, I was trying to process all of that and understand like why they needed that much police there, and what was the point of them having like batons and like zip ties and like mace to like attack people.
Yeah. No, yeah.
Uh,
In the wake of like the Trayvon Martin shooting, I do think there wasn't as much protest or riots. Like, I was like pretty young, so like maybe I just didn't hear about it as much. But do you think like momentum has been developing more and more like throughout the years?
I think I think yeah, I think a lot more has, yes. I think it's been continuous. Like it's just been
Hmm.
continuous. This is just happening over and over again. And now we have the incredible tool of like social media and the cameras
Yeah.
where people are catching this stuff. But there's a lot more work where like people now have like the lens to look at this. not just from the lens of like this is happening, but people are documenting this and they're talking about it more. And there are people who are keeping track of these murders. There are people keeping track of all of this, and there are people talking about it. Um, Before 2012, I guess there were some elements of that, but not in the same way as it is now. Like if an officer was to shoot someone dead now, like we would know in a few hours. We would figure it out because we have like people out there that look for this stuff and that report it. And now it's a key, it's something that's talked about in the media a lot now too. So it's more attention to on it than it was before because we kind of forced that attention on this subject. Um, and because we forced attention on this subject, I think um, we're now catching everything that kind of happens everywhere, and that's good in a way. In many ways, that's good because now we know when it's happening. We know if these officers are being arrested or they're just getting away with it, and as a result, we can do direct action.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think like there's been more of a momentum of like a national movement that's fueled by social media because that's a platform, like different platforms where people can come together and organize in different parts of the country.